There's this one that's let go of the beans. Wants to keep them. Green beans are one of the most popular things to grow in Appalachia. Most everyone that makes a garden grows some type of beans. There's lots of different types of beans. We like to grow greasy back beans. Granny always liked to grow either white half runners, that's a really popular one, or cornfield beans. Cornfield beans was a type of bean that used to grow in the corn. They planted in the corn, it would grow up the stalk. Granny didn't really plant hers like that. Sometimes she did way back, but mostly she just planted them on a trellis, but she just liked that flavor of bean a lot. White half runner is a really popular one. Greasy backs are really popular. There's peanut beans, which is not a climbing bean. It's really a popular one in my area. Of course, there's lots of different varieties of beans, tons of them, which is really fascinating. I especially like the ones that have been handed down through families. We grow a bush bean called a Yance bean. It's been handed down in a family here in Cherokee County where I live, in the Junaluska section of Cherokee County. But there's other beans like that. This year we've got to try some new varieties. Last year one of Granny's friends told her the rattlesnake beans was her favorite, so we've grown those. And so far they have produced unbelievably, so we're really excited to try those. A gentleman that watches YouTube, our videos, very kindly sent me a bean he calls a goose bean. He says those are his favorites, so I'm trying that one this year. So far my plants don't have any beans on them, but they've got blooms, so hopefully I'll be able to try that one soon. But today I was going to talk about how we cook fresh green beans in Appalachia. So there's lots of different ways to cook green beans because green beans not just grown, of course, in Appalachia. They're common all over the world. People love beans, so lots of people eat them, lots of different ways. But the traditional way to cook them in Appalachia and throughout much of the South, actually, is to cook them for a long period of time. Now, I know there's certain people that don't like that. They say they get mushy or they're too soft or whatever, but that's the traditional way of cooking them. And for someone like me that's grown up eating green beans like that, eating Granny's green beans, that's just my preferred way, how I like to cook them. I like green beans also if they're still crisp, like if you roast them or broil them maybe in the oven or saute them in a pan. Those are good too. But when I really want a good pot of green beans, I want the ones that I grew up eating, that traditional Appalachian way of cooking them, which is for a long period of time till they do get soft. So I'm going to show you how to do that today. But first off, I'm going to start with showing you how to break and snap the beans, how to prepare them before you cook them. So when I break up green beans, everybody has their own method, and everybody should have their own method. That's the best way to do it, is figure out what works for you. But I like to have, of course you have your green beans, I like to have a bowl for my strings and then a bowl to break them in. Some people prefer to string them all and then break them up. Some people do it in one bean at a time, ever how they go. I usually do a few and then break them and then get a handful again. When I was growing up, Granny was super picky about leaving strings on, so that's another thing. A lot of people don't like to string the type of bean you need to string because it's hard to get the strings off sometimes. Now, she was super picky and she would go back through the ones that we used and really got onto us if we left them. Then when the grandkids come along and she would let them help, Corey and Katie help, she wouldn't be picky about it. And one time I said, "Now, Mama, you was really hard on us and made us be really picky about the strings. Why don't you say anything to the girls about it? Because they're leaving strings all over the place." And Granny said, "Oh, I don't worry about those. Those jars that they help me can, I'll just make sure that I give them to you." So she wasn't worried about it because she wasn't going to be eating them. But when it comes to strings, you can be as picky as you need to be. So first of all, you just start at one end and pull the string, and then you turn the bean over and you pull the other side. When I was teaching a class recently, I was surprised that, and I shouldn't be, but some of the people in the class had never strung beans before, so they didn't. So of course they wanted to know which that one come off perfectly, but sometimes you'll pull a string and it'll get about halfway down the bean and break off on you. Well, then what do? Well, then you're like, that comes in, if you're as picky as Granny, you can take a knife and kind of get it out. You can go ahead and break up the bean, and then when you break it, you'll be able to get the string. As you break it, you'll be able to grab a hold of the string that way. or you can leave it. That's just personal preference, what you want to do. But I had kind of took for granted that they all had broke beans before, and they had not. So again, you just start at one end. So see there, this is going to be one that there's no strings that come off. So what do? Well, it's because this is such a young bean. I probably shouldn't have picked it, but I did when I was picking them. Sometimes you get excited and just pick them all. So see, but there's one of the strings. So then you can pull that one. And as far as another question my students had was, well, how do you know what size to break them? How do you break them up? Well, that's again personal preference. It doesn't really matter. You can have great old big pieces if you want to. See, there's some of the strings coming out now. Or you can do little bitty tiny bites. That's just totally, again, up to you. Let's see, I was going to find one. So this one is one that I've really let be on there too long. Like that one a minute ago, I picked too early. This one's kind of been there too long. It was hiding from me. And sometimes that happens, and you can feel it's tough, but it's also kind of flimsy feeling. So these, what I like to do for them, I will totally shell them out. You can see how it's so flimsy, it's really coming out. So these beans, when you do it this way, and I just add these to my green beans, we call these shellies. Well, I love beans with a lot of shellies in them. That's my kind of thing. So it doesn't bother me too bad to have to do it like this. Another reason that you might take the shelly out is if these beans are really pretty. These are those rattlesnake beans, and they're just so lovely. And I hope I really like how they taste, because we may be converted this year. These have done so well. But anyway, if you do have a bad place on a bean, maybe a bug had bit right here, even bored into it, a little worm or something, you can just take your knife and cut that little part out, cut the brown part out, and still use the rest of the bean. That's totally fine to do. Or you can, if those little brown spots don't really bother you, you can leave them and eat them, and it won't hurt you either. I mean, I wouldn't want to eat a bug, of course, but as far as brown spots, having a little brown spot here or there, that's, again, personal preference about how picky you'd like to be. It's breaking beans is something I like to do, of course, because I like to eat the bean. Whether we're putting them up, canning them, or if I'm making a fresh pot of beans like I'm going to make today, it's one of those things you can just do and not think about. It's relaxing. When I was a kid, we'd sit around and do it together, and then since Matt and I have been married and had Corey and Katie, of course, they're grown now, but it's a thing we would do. We would sit around, whether we sit on the porch or even just sit around watching TV and doing it together. Corey and Katie like to talk about doing it, and they've got great memories of breaking beans with Granny. Like I said, she wasn't very picky with them like she was with me when I was growing up, but still, they've got those great memories. Corey and Katie and my niece, their cousin April, would go out to Granny's and help her. They'd help her pick them in the garden, and then they'd help her break them up when she's getting ready to can, and they'd be silly. That's why they liked it a whole lot, and Granny didn't care. She didn't care how silly they were. So there was a lot of laughing and cutting up along with the bean breaking. Corey and Katie and April, again, because they grew up together, big buddies, they used to like to eat green beans raw. And I've never really done that or liked it, but they used to raid Pap's garden in the summer. If they got hungry, they'd go pick them a handful of beans and eat them right there in the garden. So I'm going to break up the rest of these beans, and then I'm going to show you how I cook fresh green beans in the traditional Appalachian method. I just can't believe how pretty these rattlesnake beans are. There's just like not one blemish on them. Huh? I know. So I've got all the bowl of green beans that I'm going to cook broke up, and all those beans I only found 2 that had the little brown spot, so you can see right there. So you could just cut the bean on each side and throw that part away, discard it. Or if it was big enough like this one to have a shelly in it, you could discard the whole thing and just get the shelly out if you prefer to do it that way, and get rid of the little brown areas that are there. But this one, you can just take your knife and cut it out. These were really pretty beans. They didn't hardly have any bad places on them. As far as what you've got left here, your holes in your strings where you hold out the ones that were too tough, you can put this in your compost pile. Of course, you can just discard it. If you have animals, chickens or hogs or whatever, they love to eat that kind of stuff. That'd be a great thing to do with it. And now the next step is that we're going to give them a good rinse in the sink. We don't use any kind of pesticides or anything like that, but dust and just birds and just the general being outside, they get dirty more than you would think. You know, when you're weed eating or mowing grass and it blows up on them, or if it's birds flying by doing what they do, or just dust from the yard. So we're going to give them a quick rinse. I have a lot of stainless bowls. I like to use them to rinse stuff in. This makes it easier. While you're rinsing them, kind of throwing them around, that's a great time to look. Sometimes you'll see strings that you left. That's a good time because you can't never get them all. See, right there's one, I see. So that's a good time to kind of double check and see if you see any more strings. And even though they looked fairly clean, you can see the water gets pretty dingy. You can see what dust and stuff was actually on them there. Give them another good rinse. Now that I've got them rinsed twice, I'm going to put them in a pot, and I'm going to fill them with cold water and cover the beans. And Granny taught me to do this part. And I don't know if everybody else does it, or if if she was just really paranoid about her beans being clean, but she's taught me to, before I'm actually going to start the cooking process, I put the beans in a pot with water, cover them with water, and then bring them to a hard boil on the stove, and just let them boil like just even 30 seconds, and then drain them and rinse again. And by doing that hard boil, what Granny called, it gets the bean scum, is what she called. It gets the scum off. Well, when you do this, I'll show you in a minute, you can see it foams up and gets some stuff. I don't think that it's anything that would hurt you at all if you skipped this step. I'm not saying that it would hurt you, but it was just how Granny did hers. So that's how I do mine. So now we're going to bring them to a hard boil, and then we'll drain them again, rinse one more time, and then we'll be ready to cook them. So now I've drained them and put fresh water in after we got rid of the scum, bean scum that Granny calls it. And now I've covered them with water, and now I'm ready to season them. So when it comes to seasoning beans, you can use, these are the traditional things that are used. Salt pork, which we call fatback, streaked meat, streak-a-lean. People call it by different things. You can use ham. Ham is great. You can use bacon. You can use hog jowls. All those would be great. So we use typically what we have on hand. A lot of times we use bacon. We like a fatty bacon. But I don't have any bacon, so today I have side meat. And that's what we're going to use. Salt pork, that's what we're going to use. So this is about 10 cups of beans. And I would put, and again, this is going to be personal preference, and you're just going to have to play around to figure out what you like best. But I would put at least two strips in there. Then you can salt and pepper to taste, or we don't really put pepper, salt. This is salty though, so you'll have to be careful about that if you're using a salty meat like I am today. And then you cover it. You're going to cook it on, I would say, medium-high heat. But the thing about it is, because you're going to cook it for so long, it's not something that you can just put on and forget about, unless you were to put it in a crock pot or something like that. You're going to have to keep an eye on it to make sure that the water doesn't evaporate, and then of course the beans would scorch. So you kind of got to keep adding water as they begin to cook down. And you don't have to cook them at a hard boil, but you want them really simmering pretty good the whole time, and that way they cook faster. I mean, you know, unless you've just got all day to fool with it. So we're going to start them, put the lid on and let them start cooking, and then I'll show you when they're finished. So the beans are ready now. They've been cooking a little over an hour, maybe an hour and a half, at a pretty high, not full rolling boil, but at a good simmer. You could definitely take longer to cook them if you turn down that, you know, if you had more time. We're about to eat supper, so I was trying to hurry them along, and it's okay to hurry them along, but you need to keep check about the water. You wouldn't want it all to cook out and for your beans to scorch. And the doneness is really up to you. You may not like yours as done as most Appalachian, the traditional Appalachian beans. So as you can see here, you can see what they look like. Using meat in them really makes the broth rich. It gives it a richness, which is really good with cornbread and beans. I see this is what I do. I see a string right there, and I can't blame anybody but me for that. But strings don't bother me that much. So you can, to suit your taste, once they're done or as they cook, you can taste and see if you think you need to add salt or pepper or any other seasonings you might like. They're really good. So this is the traditional way, as I said, that Appalachians cook their green beans, which is to get them very done compared to the rest of the country that might like them, or I shouldn't say the rest of the country, just to other folks who might like them more crispy or more still with a crunch. We like them really done to where they're really soft. Really good. All it needs is cornbread, and we're about to have it. We're about to get it out of the oven right now. I hope you'll leave me a comment and tell me, did you grow up with green beans like this like I did? Or maybe you're one of the ones who don't like them because they're too soft and you prefer them with still have a bite or a crunch, like if you saute them or broil them. But mostly I hope you'll drop back by often as we celebrate Appalachia.